Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have a special guest, Laurie Lee Hall. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, glad to be here
Yay.
now.
And Randy, thanks for co-hosting with me today.
Always a pleasure, Gene.
Laurie Lee has a special story, and we'll get into that soon. Laurie, tell us the name of your book
Sure, I'll
and show it.
reach over and grab a copy. Dictates of Conscience, published by Signature Book in November of 2024. Dictates of Conscience, specifically from Mormon high priest to my new life as a woman, is my memoir outlining my life story, my journey as a woman with transgender history, and touching upon my experiences as an LDS Church leader, stake president, and a bishop, as well as being senior architect, chief architect for the church's temples for a number of years, church employee for 20 years, and how all that unraveled when I began transitioning my gender presentation to live authentically. So all of that captured in its lovely detail in Dictates of Conscience, which is available both in hardcover, Kindle, and Audible, where I narrated it myself, and that was a ton of fun.
And we'll have a link to Amazon. I suppose that's where most people buy books nowadays. And
yeah, although Signature, Benchmark, a number of bookstores are carrying it. If you like to support your local independent bookstore, they would be happy to have that endorsement as well. But yeah, you can pick it up on Amazon.
That's right. I've been to Benchmark, and Benchmark always has a display at Sunstone, which is coming up in a week or so.
Right. A lot of great conferences have taken place over the last year, and Signature and Benchmark both have tables at most of those around Utah, where I did a book signing at the Gather conference just a few weeks ago there in Provo, and met just a wonderful crowd of excited future readers. Was able to sign my book wherever I might be speaking when I'm in Utah, or sharing at a table or something of that nature. I'm happy to sign books and to meet readers and to get feedback. It's been a wonderful experience.
Laurie, I have a question for you. You made an interesting comment in the pre-show that if we purchase books, it helps you, but if we read the books, it helps those who read them. What was your reason for writing this book and for documenting your life in the book form?
It's something I spell out in the preface to the book. But to paraphrase that, I really began wanting to share my story. It's a little unique to have done the things that I did in my pre-gender transition life, both ecclesiastically and at church headquarters in Salt Lake City, and then to basically be walking the halls of the church administration building and being on a well-known, visually aware voice to the members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. I presented to them frequently, and they all knew that I was transgender and that I planned to transition, and that unique story seemed to me to be worth recording. In fact, I refer to the fact that I felt like I had an obligation, a responsibility to tell that story from its unique perspective. But then as I wrote the manuscript, and it took a little over 2 years to do that, between 2022 and 2024, there was so much going on, both in the church, the LDS Church, and other churches, as well as politically, in contrary to against the transgender community, that it became very apparent that this book was necessary at a much larger level as well, to tell the story of a transgender person progressing through transition of presentation in a circumstance where there was a significant power structure overseeing that individual's life. In my case, the LDS Church, which had kind of 24/7 control of me for those years, and to demonstrate really the most important principle that I think can come out of my writing, and that is that self-identified gender identity is real. And the only way you can know a person's gender identity is to ask the individual and then believe them, believe what they're saying, and that each of us who self-express a gender identity different from our biological sex at birth deserve to have the same, not special rights, the same basic rights and equality before the law and before the sacrament table as any other person.
That's
And
right. All are children of God, right?
And ultimately, that became my top tier burning desire to put this primary history source of my story in front of the world. And I would hope that 10,000 other people would do the same, because we need these voices, we need these stories.
I can't imagine, and I think we'd be shocked to know how many people you've helped get through their transition or help them understand why they're feeling like they're feeling. So I think that's an incredible mission that you've accomplished to help others through this same experience, or at the very least, help them accept and understand those who are transitioning. I think it's wonderful.
I'm 63 years old, which means that I was a young person seeking gender affirming support in the 1970s. And I talk about in the book how I thought I was the only one. And then I joined the Mormon Church in as a freshman in college, and really thought that I could only be the only person in the church who had these wild ideas about who I really was that didn't fit what everyone told me I was in their eyes. And that idea of being the only one is very prevalent in trans stories, particularly older folks like myself. Today's youth are growing up in a situation where it's much better understood, it's much more public, it's in media and social media and so forth. But at the same time, access to gender affirming care and support is being heavily legislated against. It's being banned in places. And it makes my head explode to think that that thing that could have made my life so much easier, that now exists and is readily available, is being intentionally withheld from young people who would benefit from it, whose lives would be made better, whose struggle would be lessened, simply because folks don't want to extend it to them because they don't believe it.
I'd love to draw a parallel, because I know that this is a much smaller scale, but when I transitioned from an active member of the church to post-Mormon, I had the feelings that I was the only one going through that. And it made it so much more difficult. It actually made me feel guiltier. And then when I started recognizing, just for my own comfort, I started Googling, ex-Mormon. And of course, then I found out there's an entire world out there, a community of people that has gone through the same thing. And it was such a relief to me to find that out. So I can imagine, with the huge life transition that you've made, how you would feel like you're alone in a world of non-acceptance. So
right, and
that's very admirable.
On the other hand, folks on the opposite side would say just because everyone's doing it doesn't make it right. But the telling of stories and getting to know us and our sincerity and the reality of our experiences changes hearts. And that's why telling stories is so important. And then listening to stories is so important, because hearts can be changed and a recognition can overcome just simple unknowing, or whether it's willful or just simple ignorance, that these lives do exist, and these lives are valid, and these experiences are real. And I invite anyone who doesn't get it to get to know someone, read a story, hear a podcast, whatever it may be, feel what we've felt, and then judge for oneself whether that seems credible and tenable. It's just so critical.
That's right. And before we get to know sort of like your early years, I wanted to add one thing to your discussion about self-identity. And even, I mean, you're familiar, my recollection of the temple recommend questions was, the final question was, how do you feel about your worthiness?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
do you consider yourself worthy to enter the Lord's house and participate in temple ordinances?
That almost sounds exactly the way I remember it.
Go figure.
Yeah, it at least was the 2012 version of it.
Right. And so you have to self-identify in that regard, right? So why not in other regards, right? And so that's great. So yeah, your interesting Mormon story starts out as not a Mormon. So tell us about your early years and where you were living and what things affected you as a young person and as a teen, and
sure
decisions to go to college.
And so as a young person, I was born and raised in Massachusetts, central New England in the hill country, in the 1960s. And then 70s, I attended high school and got it in my head that I wanted to become an architect. And so I did everything I could to prepare myself to be attractive to a university who had a school of architecture. And then the other side of my story that slips in, it's always back there in the background, is the fact that from age 5 at least, I identified as female, and yet I was being told I was male, and I presented as male, and there was conflict there that really became a huge part of my young life and experiences up until the point where I went to college, where I tell a story about in the book about coming out for myself out of the shadows of the room where I had been kind of practicing being a girl, and then realizing that in the outside world in 1979, there was no way for me to go forward and realize this individual who I knew myself to be but could never live as. And so I tried to squash all that. And I was successful at getting accepted to a School of Architecture, Rensselaer Polytechnic in upstate New York.
Laurie Lee,
yeah.
I wonder, what was it that made you think about architecture?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. It was a combination of my interests, desire to create, my artistic skills that I developed as a young person.
You loved angles in geometry, right?
I had a perfect semester in geometry once. That all went well. No, it's just, I didn't know an architect. I never met one. Wasn't really sure what they did, but I was determined I was going to be one. I don't know what forces drove me to that. It was the right decision. It couldn't have been a better decision for me. I'm grateful that at age 14 that I latched onto that and determined that that's what I was going to do with my life.
So you didn't see like a coffee table book about Frank Lloyd Wright or anything like that? That's pretty amazing, when you think about it.
I couldn't have been more naive. Well, the first architect I ever met was at my freshman interview at Rensselaer, and it just, I don't know how I got there, but I got there, and I excelled at it, and did quite well with it through the years.
Hey, Laurie, I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I missed this, and you said it already, but at this time, were you ever? Did you ever identify as a gay man?
No, not really. I kind of was who I was. I had romantic attraction to my best friend. I mentioned that in my story, But really, as I look back on it, it was never guy to guy. It was Laurie
Because you were a
Lee.
woman. You were
It was Laurie Lee to my friend, who I refer to in the book as Mike.
And I remember hearing that you had sisters, and there's an interesting story that I've heard about. You felt you were
I was
sisters.
just one of them. Yeah, I was just one of them. We were three sisters until it became obvious that that's not how it was really working. But as a child, that's how it worked. My mom told me that my name, had I been born a girl, she told me this at age 7, was that I was going to be Laurie. And that stuck. I knew who I was. You know,
that's similar to me. I'm named after my Aunt Jean.
Oh, very good.
So I was told a similar story in a way.
Having a name to go with my identity was pretty important, because I never let go of that. And ultimately, when I came out to my parents some 45 years later, one of the things that softened the blow was, remember the name you told me I was going to carry? That's the name I've chosen to be for the rest of my days. And that meant a lot to them.
And that's kind of cool that they were still around, where you could tell them that. My dad passed in 1999, and there's so much I would like to talk to him about my mom 15 years later. And it's like, I don't know why I didn't think of all these questions I have for them now when they were alive. But
sure.
But so that's great that happened. So you're at college and you learn about Mormonism. Was that the first time you heard about Mormonism?
Yeah, it actually was. I guess I grew up under lots of rocks, because not only did I not know anything about architecture, but I hadn't ever heard the name of the church before, or knew any of the Mormon stories, or the pioneers going west, or any of that type of thing. In Massachusetts, we kind of learned about the Pilgrims and the Revolutionary War, and that's when our history stopped. Our history education. But I was introduced by a classmate to the church and its teachings, and it felt good to me. It felt right. I had spiritual experiences. I was prone to have spiritual experiences, apparently, and I also, as I describe in the book, at that point, committing that I was going to live my adult life presenting as male, it looked like the LDS Church provided a really good path to become a successful husband, father, provider, priesthood leader, all those good things. And I jumped into that path and checked off all the boxes and did everything I was supposed to do. And
did you ever think that if you read the scriptures or prayed enough that you would start feeling like a man?
I didn't address it that same way. I know lots of folks who did, and I don't know whether it was because of how I approached Mormonism, but I had put my identity in a box and refused to acknowledge it by the time Mormonism caught up with me. So it wasn't about growing up as a Mormon boy, so to speak, with this struggle. It was like I compartmentalized it so that it wasn't ever a case of, as it is with so many others, if I, serve a mission, if I marry in the temple to a woman, whatever it is, that those things are going to fix me, that Heavenly Father somehow was going to fix me. I had already put that away, and that didn't exist, I thought.
You might have felt that your spiritual experiences told you that God loves you.
Yeah,
the way you are.
That was exactly the case, but ultimately it took actually asking that question and feeling that experience many, many, many years later, like 30 years later, before I really connected those two issues together. And that meant all the difference in the world, to realize that who I was realizing I really was exactly who God thought I had always been.
Were you of an age where you served a mission, or was that kind of like you were exempt from that?
Yeah, no, I didn't feel exempt at all. I heard President Kimball say every young man serve a mission. And at the time that defined me as well. And I said, yep, I'm going. So I got through 3 years of architectural school, asked very kindly if I could leave Rensselaer for 2 years. And then I assured them that I would be back, went and served a mission in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and and then came back and finished my my training. So I did serve a mission. Wasn't my original
Wow.
plan, but boy, I felt like that was important to do.
So I
at
know
that
that
time.
Chile and Argentina and other places experienced some like baseball baptisms. Did you try to do any architecture baptisms with anybody?
Well, I served in the city of Buenos Aires, and there couldn't be a more lovely European equivalent South American city. Lots of beautiful architecture there, and I carried my sketchbook around a lot on preparation days, and recorded kind of what I saw. But yeah, no, it was an interesting time to serve a mission because it was right after the United Kingdom and Argentina had a war about the Falkland Islands, and the U.S. had, of course, sided with the United Kingdom, Great Britain at the time, and so we weren't well accepted as North Americans in Buenos Aires at the time. So it was a difficult mission, and one that took some creativity that I describe in the memoir to learn how to share the gospel with people in a big city that was kind of cold and unfriendly in some ways.
And Argentina also had like a German influence because of.
Yeah, you think about South America naively. I thought, indigenous folk with a Spanish heritage and llamas and things like that. And I get to Buenos Aires and it's Italians and Germans and Jews, and tall skyscrapers and lots of cars and buses. It was just not the South America that I thought it might be that I was going to. And coming from the Northeast of the United States and having lived and walked and worked in Boston and New York City, my presidents all thought I was a city elder. And so they left me there in the city the whole time. And it was a great experience.
You thought it was going to be bullfights and boleros.
Yeah, it wasn't. Wasn't
That was my mission.
Yeah.
Randy served in Spain.
Yeah. Well, it was a great place to serve because it was very cultural and just such a great eye-opening experience for me. And I grew up. My whole church growing up experience was in those 18 months in Argentina, because I left pretty green and I came home with skills that I
Right. You were
hadn't
in the
developed.
18-month mission.
Yep. I like to say that, and this works really well for me, that I served a sister mission in the early 1980s because I left when I was 21. I was called and served for 18 months and came home when I was 22 and a half and went back to school and found a spouse, so it's very much like all the sisters who served in my mission were the same definition. So worked for me. I told my trainer when I met with him years later at an event that I was his only sister missionary companion. And he thought that was great. Very accepting of me.
How do you find a spouse? Was there young adult activities near your college?
A little bit. The Albany, New York area where we attended church, we had just one ward there at the time, but covered a whole bunch of universities around New York's Capital District. And so we had a pretty good institute, and attended by people from all kinds of different universities, and also folks who lived at and worked at home. And I met my then future wife in our ward when I returned to Albany.
I know that this is obviously in the book, and I think people would be curious to know, speaking of your future wife, how did she respond to your coming out as transgender?
And just so that we put this in time frame, we'd been married 25 years before I came out. Had we gotten to know each other these days in a time frame where knowing what gender identity means and so forth, would I have told her that was something I experienced before we dated, before we married? Yeah, absolutely. But in 1984, was that something that I was even prepared to talk about? I didn't have the words to talk about, really, to be able to describe it. And I also had put it deep in a box that I thought I had successfully closed and taped shut, and it wasn't ever going to come out again. So no, it wasn't until year 25 of our marriage before I came out to her. Only after I finally came out to myself and accepted myself and had spiritual experiences that make me know that it was okay, and then I needed to share with her what my real situation was.
What
I'm sorry.
temple? Was it a temple marriage? And what temple did you get married in?
Yeah, we went to living in upstate New York at the time. The closest temple was Washington, D.C. So we went down to the D.C. temple and were sealed. Nowadays, there's half a dozen temples within a couple hours of where we lived, some of which I'm responsible for.
So when you eventually came out to her, what was her reaction? And I just one other, and not to layer the question, but I'd be curious to know if there was someone that influenced your decision that helped you come out, that you saw. I was wondering if there was someone that had an influence on you that you could look up to and say, if they can do it, I can do it. Or was it all a self-spiritual experience?
It was actually all internal up until and including the time where I first came out to my spouse. Subsequent to that, after that, I got to know that there were some other LDS folk who, like myself, experienced gender dysphoria as it came to be known around that time, and were working on transition as well. It felt really good to know that there were other Latter-day Saints who were experiencing and struggling with what I was struggling with, and it helped to get to know them and their spouses, and that kind of familiarity, at least with a few others that were walking where we were walking, I found helpful. I think she found helpful for a while. But no, it was very much, for me, it was very much about coming to accept these things internally, both in head and in my heart and in my spirit, and having spiritual experiences associated with that gave me the strength and courage to take those initial steps.
It was a long and lonely walk for you, I bet.
There were lonely times and there were scary times because there was a lot of self-doubt. There was a lot of harmful thoughts that went through my mind. It was tricky because once I resolved for myself that this is who I was and got therapy and the help that I needed to really come to grips with that and accept that and started to come out, then it was dealing with all the social blowback, cultural blowback, employment blowback, all of which I describe in Dictates. And then all the negative thoughts and emotions and harmful thoughts that came from having to deal with other people's reaction to my truth.
Was your wife supportive at the time? And are you still with her, or is she still with us?
Alive, yes.
Okay.
There were times in our marriage that she was understanding and supportive. There were times when it was very difficult for her. I won't tell much more of that because that's her story to tell. But it came a time around my excommunication where she was put in a very difficult position with regard to the church and choosing the church, choosing to follow her church leaders versus choosing where I was headed as a no longer church member.
That's right. Your excommunication would threaten her eternal salvation.
And it did. From her perspective, yes, it did. And I detail how church leaders actually threatened her, using threatening her as a means of trying to get me to obey and
to still toe the line.
And to still toe the line. Well said. that didn't happen. So we separated and eventually divorced. I found someone new who loves me and sees me for exactly who I am. And that's been a great benefit in my life. Yeah. So it's been 7 years now that all that's taken place.
Yeah. So we kind of skipped over graduating with a degree, and how do you transition into working for the church as a temple architect? What's that story?
It's one of those things where I just continued to follow my heart professionally, that as I practiced architecture after graduating from Rensselaer in a firm in Albany, got my architectural license in New York, ran into a situation where my gender dysphoria box blew open on me. And I had some difficulty struggling with that and struggling to put that lid back on that box, which caused a break with the firm that I worked for in Albany. And I had a strong impression, had a patriarchal blessing very clearly tell me that I needed to use my talents and abilities to build up the church. And so off I took my family and we went to Utah, and I got a job at church headquarters. Initially helping welfare services build their buildings.
Okay.
And eventually that turned into working in the meeting house program of the church for 5 years, directing it worldwide, and then being asked to direct the construction of temples worldwide and ultimately the design of temples worldwide. And then when church leaders found out that I considered myself transgender, they took me off of temples and put me on certain special projects, which included the Provo Missionary Training Center. And I worked for 4 years on probation because I was trans. And eventually it came to the point where I simply needed in my life to complete my gender presentation transition. I worked hard to try to help church leaders realize that I would be the best version of myself as an employee if I was allowed to live authentically. That didn't work out. And so my employment after 20 years with the church ended. And I found myself at age 55 looking at what am I going to do next?
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that you are a pretty big deal in the LDS Church. I mean, you are a major player. And I know I got to see your interview with John DeLynn and was absolutely intrigued by everything that you did for the LDS Church.
One of the Easter eggs that I made sure got placed in the appendix of Dictates of Conscience is a list of all my notable projects with the church. It's long, about 3 pages, of what role I played on which temples and other special buildings. And it's extensive. It was a great body of work to be a part of, to lead, to be in a position where for years I was meeting with and presenting to members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, working closely with members of the Quorum of the 12, individually, one-on-one in their offices, like as I did, for example, with Boyd K. Packer, who was president of the Quorum of the 12 at the time. Yeah, all of that's kind of, I give lots of hints and Easter eggs and little stories about how some of that all went down. Members of the church are very interested in those chapters that are in the middle of the book because I do share some stories as they went down in my experience and kind of what that was like to work there and to do those things at that level. It was certainly a high point of my life professionally because, you know, if a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who was a licensed architect could design for themselves, pun intended, the ultimate position, I think I was fortunate to have that for a number of years, that ultimate position. When I left, others have that opportunity now, and that's great. But for a season, I had that opportunity, and it was really cool.
And did you feel spiritually guided to construct temples, and how how would you approach that? Would you try to incorporate regional elements in the designs? And how did you feel as you approached, I guess, in prayer every time, what the design would be?
Leading that work was an extremely spiritual experience. For me, I was serving at the same time as either bishop or a stake president. The way I approached my ecclesiastical work and the way I approached my physical work at church headquarters at the office was identical. It was all about seeking guidance and inspiration, and then acting on that collaboratively with all of those with whom I had the opportunity to work with. It was very much a spiritual experience. I felt guided many times to solutions to thorny design problems. I felt that I had cultivated the ability to literally see things in my mind's eye that ultimately turned into built projects. One that I refer to in the book was the Provo City Center Temple, and how that was going to work, putting a temple inside a historic tabernacle, and how those rooms would all lay out. That was really just a very kind of sudden spiritual gift that came to me, and that I sketched out, and that became the guiding concept for the project. That's often how it worked.
And how many temples were you involved with from start to finish, we'll say?
The number 45 comes to mind, that were start to finish. At the time, 45 was a big number. Anymore, there's such a burst of new temples announced that 45 doesn't sound like as big a number as it did back then, but at that time, it was a lot.
Well, I know for sure that's more than Randy's ever done.
If I had $1 for every temple I designed, I'd be broke. We'll just say that.
Yeah. And so I just have a personal thing. Were you in when the Gilbert Temple was first announced?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I was noticing the other day, because my daughter lived a mile away from it as it was being constructed and stuff. And I noticed it had some elements, I thought, of the Mesa Temple, but just like on steroids. Was that part of the design?
Well, you did mention, and I didn't answer it, that we did often incorporate regional influences into the design of temples. I think we did that pretty effectively for a season, and that really brought us and brought local patrons of the temple a great deal of joy, I think, to see things that they could feel represented their part of the Lord's kingdom, if you will, expressed at the higher level of a temple, both exteriorly and interiorly.
I think the Gilbert Temple's steeple is a little bit higher than the Mesa steeple.
Yeah. Which doesn't have one at all.
I was married in the Mesa Temple, and I lived 1 mile away from the Gilbert Temple as it was being constructed. So I probably wasn't too far from your daughter, Gene.
That's right. And also, would part of your work be the redesign, or not redesign, but when they would renovate, or was that okay? So you're involved in the renovations.
So in addition to those 45, there were probably another 30 or so temples in existence that we
modernized,
basically modernized and rebuilt. One of those that was under reconstruction burned down. That was in Apia, Samoa. So what started out as a renovation project wound up being a new construction project on my watch. So those renovations took place. I began in 2005 with the studies that became renovation of the Salt Lake Temple today that's ongoing. Of course, I didn't see that project all the way through, but I began it 20 years ago.
That's really cool. Now, have you seen and I don't know if you were in on the design or anything, what they've done to the Mesa Temple. They've cleared away the visitor center. It's
in the neighborhoods.
Yeah. I was also involved in early studies that went on for years that have resulted in what's occurred there now. Wasn't around for for the actual execution of all of that, but was certainly a member of the team that considered all of that.
Was City Creek part of your duties?
The interesting thing about City Creek is that I had a corner office in the 10th floor of the church office building, and I could watch it happen. And many of my colleagues that had been working in temples prior to the announcement of the mall actually got removed from our organization and put into a separate organization to design and construct City Creek. I was not one of those. And that left me and the rest of us that remained to do temples and other special projects. But I watched City Creek go up. I watched the conference center go up from my desk, but wasn't involved in either of those two projects.
Okay. And I had a thought. Is the architect part of the hiring contractors and decision making?
At different points in my assignment, I was responsible for vetting and hiring the general contractors or construction managers. When I was responsible as director of construction, in the years that I was responsible as director of design of temples or other projects, I was the one who signed the architectural agreements for the church. There was a time when I had both of those responsibilities simultaneously between 2007 and 2010, which made me a pretty popular person in Utah because as
they would take you to dinner
as the
companies.
They wanted to, but I was really very against any appearance of being influenced. But during the downtime that took place in 2008, 2009, in which the construction and architectural programs in Utah and throughout the country greatly contracted due to the housing crisis and the downturn in the economy, the church was one of those desirable clients that just kept designing and building. And at that point in time, I was the one person in temples and special projects who was the go-to for all of those projects, all of those jobs. That was a lot of power, and it was subject, as you've pointed out, to efforts to influence my decisions. And yet I had long since decided that I wasn't going to accept anything, and I operate that all with absolute transparency and integrity. And I don't know how much that was appreciated or not, but made me sleep at night.
Was any factors of a contractor having LDS members own or operate as part of the decision-making process? Because some people think about nepotism and other things that might go on. For some people consider the LDS Church a family business because of all the Smiths and and others that have been involved in other relations.
Porter brothers.
It's not what you know, it's who you know sometimes, right?
Sure. And yeah, did I face a lot of that? I sure did, including with the name that Randy that you just mentioned. The truth is I needed to be able to make it work on paper in order to be able to make my recommendation to the presiding bishopric. The church in the 90s and earlier, but I was familiar with how it worked in the 90s, very much was a family business in many ways. We had to move that to become much more, because it got a lot bigger, much more, as I mentioned, transparent and performance driven process. And it was my goal to document that and to make my recommendations accordingly. And occasionally I made recommendations that didn't sit well with the brethren, because there may have been someone who curried favor with somebody in a particular region, or there was a company whose president wasn't LDS, active LDS. We were often asked to consider those firms that did have active LDS. But if I could demonstrate that it was critical that on this project in this location, the best firm was this one, I was pleasantly surprised how often the presiding bishopric supported my recommendation and moved forward, even though it wasn't politically or, familiarly the right
might
thing
have
to
felt
do.
if you had contracted with active LDS, that would be a backdoor way of getting a 10% discount on all the services.
I actually heard President Hinckley say that once a long time ago, and it didn't influence the work that I did over the years to come.
It sure sounds like integrity was an important word, and that's an important word in buildings, right?
Yeah.
You want a building to be able to stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just was a part of my training and who I was. And ultimately, the title of my book, Dictates of Conscience, is all about personal integrity, following the light that I received to guide my life with integrity and authenticity to who I am. That's the whole message, start to finish. And so I'm glad I can look back and say that professionally, even in a situation like I was at church headquarters, where nepotism and those kinds of influences, political and financial influences, that I never have to look back and say I allowed things to happen that kind of brought that question into play of integrity.
You weren't willing to compromise.
Yeah, and I took a lot of heat for it from time to time. And yeah, I was uncompromising, and occasionally it cost me assignments, and I didn't care.
It's almost like you did what was right and let the consequence follow.
Yeah, to quote a hymn. Yeah, I do tell in the book in one case where I was no longer the director of construction for temples because I stuck to my guns on a recommendation that ultimately proved to have been the right recommendation, not the one the church followed. So,
touche, Laurie Lee.
Yeah.
And so, when did you start formulating the thought of writing a book?
It's kind of always been back there, but certainly as I went through transition, starting really in like 2011, 2012, I started saving everything that related to the complexities of this story. When it came time finally to put the manuscript together, I had digital copies of letters I had written, of things I had written down in my, various aspects of my journal, and all the parts and pieces, to the extent that they existed, that found their way into the book, were kind of all in a place where I could retrieve them. And I'm really grateful for that, because I wasn't Wilford Woodruff. I wasn't that great of a journal keeper, but there were things there that even when I picked them up and reread them 10 years later, I went, wow, I'd forgotten about that. And it was pretty gutsy of me to do, and found its way into the manuscript.
You wanted to make sure that the title of your book was not going to be "No Man Knows Her History."
Yeah.
Make sure that everybody knew what your history was.
Yeah. No, it wasn't always easy to consider sitting down and writing the manuscript. It took, as I mentioned in my acknowledgments and so forth, it took coming here to Kentucky, where I now live, getting away from the culture in Utah, having the opportunity to be with my partner, Nancy, who is incredibly supportive and loving towards me, including being willing to work with me through the trauma I had to unpack in the process of writing my memoir. There was a lot of healing that needed to take place between the person that I was when I did my original John DeLynn interview and the person that I became as I started writing the manuscript. Unpacking trauma, discovering connections that existed that I hadn't realized when they were happening, and really healing to the point where I could share my story as extensively as I have. And that's been a wonderful blessing to me as a process. And I would recommend it to anyone who who would have a mind to do so. It was just really revealing to me. If you could be shocked by your own story, I was shocked by how my story came together and what it meant to me and what it seems to mean to readers.
Laurie, did you ever have children?
Yes, we had 5 children, as a matter of fact, and all of them live in Utah still, and they have children of their own for the most part. Yeah.
Are they supportive of you?
It varies.
Sure, like any group of kids, I suppose.
Yeah, I
Some are-
suppose. My kids that have chosen to remain more LDS seem to struggle more with my walk than the ones who have chosen not to remain LDS, who seem to be more
Sure.
accepting. I know that seems like it might be a gross oversimplification, but it actually kind of fits.
In a way, in my recalling my Mormon brain, I would think it would cause me to wonder about God, right? Why would God, create people with these different feelings of either being gay or lesbian or with gender dysphoria? It would make me question God. And so I suppose that's maybe something they don't want to experience, right? And they just want to go
Yeah,
with the flow.
I'm sure that my existence, my walk post membership in the church, that does require some noodling. It makes you ask some hard questions, which not
Well-
everybody's ready to ask.
But your kids haven't disowned you
In one case, yes.
because of it. In one case, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
But
know
the
that-
good thing is that I inherited 4 more kids with my partner Nancy, who are all very supportive of me because they didn't grow up with me being their dad, but they see me for who I am and love me and accept me the way that she does. And so in the big scale of things, I got some additional family out of the process, which is a joy to me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's right. And we hope that people can read your book and understand your story and understand your connection to God and understand that God loves all his children and God wants everyone else to love all his or her children, we'll say. Right. And so that is, to me, your book is a blessing, and I appreciate you doing it. Did it take longer once you sort of like finished it to get it published? Was that like an eye-opening experience, or did things go smoothly?
I'm a first-time author, and I had technical writing experience, which meant that I was writing 8.5 by 11, single-page bullet point recommendations to the brethren, the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, the presiding bishopric. My job
technical
was
life of Laurie Lee Hall.
Constantly writing these one-page recommendations on a daily basis, in which they were conceived, written, and executed, presented, and approved. Typically within an 8-hour period. So the process of writing a manuscript and having that manuscript edited and re-edited and pared down from 140,000 words to 80,000 words and come out better than I could have ever imagined through the incredible help I received from many people who read and reread it, but particularly Barbara Jones Brown, my editor, who's the director at Signature Book. It was a process I could not have imagined. It was a process that I tried really hard to submit myself to and never push back on. I had lots of experience in my profession of putting my designs, my tender babies in front of a critical audience and having the critical audience tell me everything that was wrong with my tender babies. And so I was accustomed with that. I'm thick-skinned enough to be able to know that critique and feedback and criticism is important. Doing that with my written words and my stories and everything I had struggled to create was very kind of analogous to my professional experience. And Barbara was able to draw out of me thoughts and feelings about my stories and experiences that I had never thought of before. I chose to work with her because she could help me see things with my woman's heart, with my woman's mind and experience, which I really deeply appreciated. And at the end of the day, it took, well, from March of 22 to November of 24 to craft this book, which isn't particularly slow or isn't particularly fast in the making of a book. But it was an intense experience that I honor. I love having had it. Like I mentioned earlier, I went through a lot of unpacking of things and dealing with things and crying big, real tears as it all came together. But I look at it now as an enormous gift to be given to whoever would receive it and read it or listen to it. And I just want that to be out there and to be a part of the overall narrative of the intersection of gender identity and the LDS Church and other mainstream religions and the politics of our day.
Is there another book inside of you?
Not sure. Occasionally, when we're together at Signature Book or other circumstances, we look at each other and go, well, there's another chapter we could add someday, maybe to a second printing. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I may have another 20 years of life left or more, and maybe there is more to occur. I guess I would see it. I don't know. I don't know if I could say it's additional chapters in a second printing or another story to tell, but I think it depends on where life takes me, because this one took me right up to the church's restrictions that came out in August of last year. So it's pretty comprehensive about my my experience with them and with the issues of this day. So depends where it all goes, I guess.
So we know that the more education is in store, I think, for the world, because we ebb and flow, we grow and we have setbacks, and we might be in a setback time right now, but we hope that there was enough critical mass over the last few decades that they can't suppress individuality and that we can move forward and progress even more in the future. I note that when you said in crafting your book, criticism and feedback is really important for producing a better product, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's temple building or a book writing. And it probably is a good recipe for even religions, I'm going to guess. Mm-hmm. And so, and it takes humility, right? It takes an understanding that each individual is not a know-it-all, that mm-hmm. other people have their own parts to bring to a project or a religion, we'll say. And so I know that Peter Bleakley in England, UK, has, as part of his thing, is to be a, what does he call it? A loyal opposition person. And
or as Greg Prince shared with me, his goal is to be a loving critic.
a loving critic, right?
Yeah.
Because there's also humility for the critic side as well, right? And so hopefully this can be a lesson for everybody. You know, parents can take criticism and grow. Church leaders can take criticism and grow from it, right? Not to think it's an attack that needs to be defended against necessarily.
Right. So if you consider my proximity to church leaders in 2012, 2013, 2014, and so on that I describe, and then you think about the comment that President Oaks, then Elder Oaks, made in January of 2015, that the church had a lot yet to learn about the transgender experience. And I described that more in detail in the book. He and the other brethren had access to me on a regular basis at that point, and had for several years. If they wanted, I think one of the tragedies of the story that I tell is that I was there and I was trying hard to articulate to them, as I describe in the meetings and the letters that I was writing and so forth, what the experience of an individual who was a faithful Latter-day Saint and a trusted employee who was experiencing gender dysphoria, what that was like, and what that individual or community of individuals needed in terms of the church as a ministering agent. If there was sincerity in his comment that we got a lot to learn still, I was available, and they never sought me out. In fact, in course of time, within a year or so, they put me out.
That's right. You were excluded.
Yeah.
Be like somebody in the candy aisle at a grocery store saying, if only I could find more nutritional choices. It's like, it's just around the corner, right?
Right. And that's not to say that, that they needed to come and ask my opinion, but had there been awareness, as there should have been, and the humility, Gene, that you describe amongst the leaders, to listen more carefully at that time, I was more than ready to share with them in a very respectful way what this all meant and what it required, and how it could be, what suggestions I might have had about how it could have been incorporated into the bigger picture of Mormonism. So that was a regrettable loss.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
That was their loss. And
So
and I just wanted to clarify. So the reason that you were that you left employment with the church is simply because you transitioned.
Yeah.
What a
Right. Under
waste.
the guise of she couldn't pass her temple worthiness interview in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
And yet I, at the time, I could pass a temple recommend interview.
You demonstrated it, right?
Yeah, in detail. And in fact, Barbara made me go through that interview in detail in Dictates of Conscience. I wanted to skim over it, but she had me write it out in greater detail. I was temple worthy as it existed at that time, other than the fact in their eyes that I was seeking to present my gender different from my biological sex of birth, which is a term that they hadn't even incorporated until 2019 into their rhetoric and policies. Yeah. Yeah, there was an opportunity for things to go very differently than they did.
It'd be like if Jesus came to earth and they just wanted to talk to him about his robes and sandals instead of about love.
Okay.
That's a good one, Gene. I like that. I like that.
Yeah. They were just happy to get your technical knowledge and not the spiritual breadth and depth that you could bring to an organization that really could use a more expansive view of people, we'll say.
Yeah, and recognizing that 10 years ago, when these things could have happened, that really would have put them in the forefront on at least transgender acceptance, gender identity acceptance.
Well,
we've had you for an hour, and Randy, I'll let you say some final thoughts and appreciations. And if you have one more question, we'll do that. But otherwise, we can end soon.
I don't have a question, but I just want to point out the ridiculousness of your mind was obviously a great mind and so many accomplishments. Your mind never changed. Your mind has always been the same. Simply because you choose to identify as a woman, the church dismisses you. And it's like your mind is no longer valid. Your talents, your abilities, sorry, no longer valid because you're living your true self. That really burns my butt. And I'm sorry that the world is, especially the church, is like they are, because that where's the justice? Where's the justice in the church? It doesn't.
It almost
exist.
makes you want to be on a podcast that points out some difficulties.
Right? Yeah, that's a good idea. We should put this out to the world, huh?
That's right.
Let's put it on the internet.
That's right. Well, thanks, Laurie Lee, for coming on. If you have any other parting words, you can say them now.
Oh, thank you both for this conversation. I think it opened up some eyes and some doors that I actually haven't talked about before. So every single podcast is important because we've talked about things today that haven't come up before, and it's valuable to share these things.
That's right.
We sure appreciate you coming.
From our differences, we can be a more whole person, as we share with each other. Yes. Thanks so much for coming on. To our viewers, share, like, and subscribe. Buy Laurie Lee's book. We'll include in our description a way to buy it. And also you can go to bookstores, and we'll include Laurie Lee's Mormon Stories appearances and some other appearances that she feels would be valuable. Like she said, every podcast can bring out something from their guests that might not have been brought out in the other podcasts. And so our whole existence, Latter Daily Digest, is about honoring creators and sending people to books, sending people to other podcasts, because the diversity of thought and opinions is well worth it. Being free to think for yourself and to express yourself is amazing. And we want everybody to also be encouraged by creativity, so that maybe you out there somewhere can create something that's personal to you. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of 2025.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right. Thanks.